David, I was just about to ask Chelsea about the Sixers and Heat game tonight, and I'm leaning Heat only because I'm not quite so sure that James Harden can be the same James Harden that we saw back in Game 4, but can he be?
Well, I'm sure it's possible, but this is something we've been writing about and talking about, Drew, for a while. He seems to have hit a stage in his career now where it struggles to put together two, quote, James Harden games in a row. It's pretty much a fact that the world's best players, when they're in their prime, and even just as they're exiting their prime, they tend to be fantastic most games. Not every game, but most games. And as they age, you still have games where you're reminded of their brilliance. They just don't happen nearly as often as they once did. And so, yeah, it's possible he'll play incredibly well in Game 5, and then you wouldn't expect it so much in Game 6. It's just not likely. And obviously Miami's going to be focused on him a little bit more if he is doing well, which is still good for Philly because they've got Joel Embiid inside and Maxey running around and shooters. It would help Philly enormously if James can have another one of those games. Again, you shouldn't expect to see it. Be pleasantly surprised if you do.
I think that's the mindset with James Harden because during the regular season, it seems like he had his big games against bad defenses, and the Heat are not a bad defense. And I will say the games in which he's been big in the postseason, some of his shots have just been low percentage shots. So even if it's great defense, it's, fadeaway threes. And a lot of it depends on if he's getting the foul calls. If he's getting to the free throw line, that's when James Harden is at his best. But let's look at the Heat for a second, because my underlying thought process is the Heat have had back-to-back games where they have shot incredibly poorly, but the Heat are one of the best three-point shooting teams in the NBA. So do we expect a bounce back from this Heat offense tonight against the Sixers?
Yeah, I would expect so. Good teams tend to shoot good, and great shooting teams tend to shoot great, and they're borderline a great shooting team. It had been this year. What's amazing is they shot so poorly the other night, but Jimmy Butler was unbelievable. He's been a terrific player in this series. So you kind of expect the same from him overall, maybe not necessarily from three where he doesn't always shoot so well, but they shoot well. They're at home. And that makes a difference. They're comfortable in that environment, obviously, and the fans behind them. It kind of does something for the psyche of players typically. And they also realize that this is an incredibly important game. So it won't just be about shooting. It's going to be their best effort defensively on the glass, just bringing a real fight. If you watch the Boston-Milwaukee series, which I know we'll talk about here in a moment, the intensity in that series is unmatched in the others. And I think that Miami is capable of ratcheting it up. They are a team that does tend to bring a lot of intensity, and that's going to help their cause a lot too.
We're talking with David Thorpe. You can read his work at truehoop.com. He's executive director of the Pro Training Center in Clearwater, Florida. He's on the Roman guest line. David, does Chris Paul return to form tonight? I think what we saw, at least from my vantage point in Game 4, is an anomaly for him. He doesn't foul out that often, and he was essentially shut down by the Mavs.
Yeah, he was bad. We've seen this before. Everyone has bad games. We've seen Chris, he's considered one of the smartest players to ever play the game. This is a first ballot Hall of Famer who isn't a great athlete in terms of as we measure speed and quickness and jumping ability. He's got an incredibly fast processing brain, brilliant skills, and they just were not really evident in this last game. I do think that's an outlier. Again, like Harden, as players age, they tend to not play great as often. I think that the incident with his family member, the fact that they're tied at 2 on a team that is favored right now to win a championship, I think we'll get a great effort. I don't know that it means he'll make every shot like he did to close out the Pelicans. That's a little bit far-fetched, but he just didn't seem as focused as it was a surprise, but I think we'll see a better Phoenix team again coming back home in a series that's competitive, and the way the Mavericks play isn't so complex. They just kind of space you out and make you deal with their sledgehammer, which is Luka. And he shot terribly in the game, and yet the team Dallas shot incredibly well. That's not something you expect to see. So I think Monty, who just Coach of the Year just won, he'll have his guys ready, and I think Chris Paul will lead a good effort that way.
Right. Usually when we see a bad game from Chris Paul, it's not back to back. It's one game and then he comes back in a big way and his normal self. Let's talk about the Celtics and the Bucks for a second. This series has
Yeah.
been incredibly hard for me to predict just because I think it's so evenly matched and it's hard to tell who's going to take the next game in the series. How are you seeing this one play out? Do you think it goes 7 games?
I don't know. I picked Boston. I think I would have picked Milwaukee had Middleton played. And if I didn't, it would have been Boston in 7. Either way, I was going to probably pick a 7-game series. Without Middleton, I just feel like the Bucks they're really missing a huge offensive piece and a good defender in a series that is, like you said, so evenly matched. So seeing Horford play the way he did last night, scoring 30 points, he cried in the locker room after the game. It was an incredible effort by him. The game was just so intense and so physical. These teams really guard with size. They play very frequently 2 bigs. It was amazing that Boston was able to win without Robert Williams. I mean, they had every chance to lose that game. Milwaukee controlled most of the game. Tatum got really hot when they needed him desperately. And then, getting that surprising event scoring from Horford. But Milwaukee are champions, and they earned it. They've gone through this tough space before. Giannis was very upset about what happened last night. Drew Holiday is such a great defender, but really struggled on offense. And this is where I'm a little worried about Milwaukee. If they do drop game 5 in Boston, which, we're going to favor Boston to win, they've got to put forth better effort offensively. They have less weapons, and that's a problem for them.
David, I did want to ask you about Golden State, who somehow came from behind to beat the Grizzlies last night, didn't take the lead until 45 seconds remaining in that game. Klay Thompson has been okay in spots, but hasn't quite been the consistent scorer, particularly from three-point range that we're accustomed to seeing. What's going on with him, and do the Warriors need him to be more consistent if they want to win a championship?
Well, the answer to the second question is almost definitely yes, because of what I was just saying about Boston, Milwaukee alone. Those 2 teams are such elite defensive teams. Golden State they need more than just Steph Curry and Jordan Poole. I don't know what's going on with him other than he just missed a long time. And other teams know about it. They know what he wants to do. This is a hard game anyway, even if you had been playing for the last couple of years. So I think that he just doesn't have quite the confidence and rhythm that he's had before. I don't see the same swagger in him in the playoffs as we've seen before, understandably so with what's gone on. But with every game they stay alive, they increase the chances for him finding his range to some degree. He won't be the same player he was, but he can be close to it. And with the other weapons they have, it might be enough. There's still some problems there. They're a small team. And as I said, you look at the East, certainly with every team but Miami, with the other 3, they're just huge. So, and that's just not even including what happens with Phoenix and Dallas potentially. But yeah, they need Klay to play well and defend well, which is something that he's capable of doing. It just takes a while to come back. He just hasn't been back very long.
He is appearing on the Roman Guest Line, David Thorpe. You can read his work at truehoop.com. He has coached more than 75 NBA players over the past 30 years. David, we always appreciate the insight. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Be safe.